Hi, this is Ebody from the Candid Frame again. Well, one of the things that camera manufacturers talk a lot about is the high ISO capability of their cameras. So increasingly, with each model, it seems like the ISO level goes higher and higher and higher. But one of the interesting things for me when I take a look through images in our Flickr group and also elsewhere, it's amazing how many images really don't take advantage of that high ISO performance. Most of us are taking pictures during the daytime, and for that, the ISO usually doesn't have to go any higher than 800. And so I don't know exactly why that is, whether it's just that we've just become accustomed to thinking about shooting during the day when there's ample amounts of light and we put away our cameras when it gets dark. But whatever the reason is, I think that it's a missed opportunity to make photographs, because I think there's an interesting thing that happens at night, whether you're shooting on the street or whether you're shooting outdoors. The quality of the light, the direction of the light, the presence of shadows can make a really incredible difference in terms of the look of photographs. So in choosing the images for this week, I thought I'd focus on just that, situations where the light is low and the high ISO capability of the cameras help to make a difference. Now, here's this shot here by Elian Mikolov, and it's called Ecumenical Prayer Vigil Lighting Our Hopes. It was shot with a Nikon D5100 at ISO 3200 down to eighth of a second at f5.3. So even though he had the ISO pushed up all the way to 3200, his lens was relatively slow for the focal length that he was shooting at, and he was forced to shoot at a eighth of a second. But I think he used it to his advantage here, because even though you get some motion blur in terms of the subject, maybe in terms of the movement of her head, she was pretty still, and you get some really nice movement for the flames from the candles in the shot. And it's the candles themselves that provide the main source of illumination for her face and for the gesture of her hands and everything in the shot. There seems to be another light source to the right here, which is helping to illuminate the background. But even though he did not have access to a very fast fixed focus lens with an aperture of 1.4 or something like that, and was using an APS-C size sensor on his camera, he still took the opportunity to make what I think is a really beautiful and moody shot. I think too many times we pass up opportunities like this because we're thinking technically. Well, we don't have a full frame sensor, or we don't have a fast enough lens, or there's not enough light, and we decide not to make the photograph. And I'm glad that he did here, because I think the result is a really beautiful photograph. Some people might criticize it because it isn't technically perfect, but I think they're missing the point. Most good photographs are about an interesting moment, not about being technically perfect. Some people will argue that point with me, but when I take a look at this photograph, I'm not thinking about shutter speeds and apertures and critical sharpness. I'm thinking about the moment, and I think he captured it aptly in this shot. Now here's a shot by Daniel Romero, shot with a 7D, 2500 ISO, 100th of a second, f2.8. Seems to be on a road or a street, and there are obviously some very strong artificial light sources and the mist creates this really wonderful quality of light in the night sky, as well as these cars that are coming down this road here and creating another source of illumination in here. The interesting thing about shooting at night and shooting under artificial colors is artificial light sources is that the colors themselves become really unpredictable. Whether you have your white balance set for daylight or tungsten or whatever, there's so many different types of light sources that can exist in the scene that the colors that it produces are out of this world, literally. And sometimes that color can help make the shot. I'm really glad that he has this human figure in here to have a sense of scale on there. But I really like the play of the light and the color and the mist. Make a remarkable looking scene in this shot. the human figure is not doing anything particularly interesting other than just sort of walking. But he's an important element in this shot, and I just really like it. Now here's a shot by Octavio Vergara, a shot with the X100S on Metro in Paris, ISO 640, 1/25th of a second at f2.0. I know how difficult it is to shoot on the Metro. There's a lot of people on there. And, people in Paris are pretty sensitive to a camera being pointed in their direction, but it can make for some interesting photographs. And I really like how he used the reflection of the person in the aisle reading the newspaper and this foreground of this fellow sitting down in the foreground. The low ISO performance is really kind of critical whether you're shooting in the Metro in Paris or a subway in New York. The light levels are not great for photography. They certainly aren't built for it. That's why shooting at the higher ISOs can make for really, you need them in order to produce a relatively sharp photograph. And but again, it's really about the light. They often have fluorescent light sources in these train cars, and it produces really interesting shadows and plays of light that become very, very interesting. It's cool that we have this moment that's happening here where these people are completely oblivious to each other. You can see that some people are kind of aware that the camera is there, but I think for the most part it's really about the moment. And I like the fact that Octavio was brave enough to shoot in the Metro and get a really interesting shot in which he creates this juxtaposition. Again, a camera at a low ISO really would not be able to pull off the shot because the Metro is moving here. So even at 1/25th of a second, it's really a challenge to keep things relatively sharp. Here, John McLaughlin made this shot with a D300 at ISO 1000, 80th of a second at an aperture of 4.5. So again, here I assume that he was using a kit lens because he wasn't able to shoot at a much wider aperture. But I love the light that's coming through the window and illuminating the cat and this older woman who was sitting on the couch. And I like the fall off of light here. I mean, it creates for a very dramatic, a very moody setting. And again, most people would think about, the fact that, her eyes are in shadow and then much of her is in shadow. And the cat's better illuminated than she is, but I think that really adds to the scene here. She's not looking particularly happy or peppy. There's a little bit of sadness that you get from her, and this presence of this cat. You get the feeling like this tells a big story, which may or may not be true, but it evokes a lot of questions, and I like questions when I look at photographs. Is this her cat? Is this her companion? Does she live alone with the cat? I mean, you can see what I'm talking about. There's just a lot of things that are asked here, but just technically, just the light that's coming in through here creates for a really, really beautiful shot. Yeah, you may have a lot of noise here in the shadows and all this other stuff, but who cares? I mean, the moment here is so interesting, and I think so many people would think, oh, we got to turn on the light, or I'd have to use a flash. Can you imagine this shot if they had turned on the flash and made this shot? It would be a completely different photograph. And I think that John here just made a wonderful, wonderful capture by choosing to choose to shoot using just the available light, and nailing the exposure on the cat here, because this easily could have gotten blown out. Technically, did a great job, and in terms of capturing a moment, excellent. Here's James Dias Davidson. I don't have any technical information here, but it looks like he was photographing in some abandoned buildings here. And again, it's all about the light, isn't it? I mean, the light that's coming through these windows here, though most of the windows on the bottom are boarded up, you're getting this stream of light through those small squares in the back, and these curtains that have fallen into disrepair, and this plate and this little platter that exists there. All of that stuff is just so rich visually. You just take a look and you're absorbing every little detail here. The light level here is probably something he could probably have shot at maybe 400 or 800 in order to get enough depth of field to keep everything, relatively sharp. So he didn't necessarily have to go to an incredibly high ISO to capture it here. But again, it's really about those situations where there isn't a lot of light, and you really have to pay attention to where the light's happening. Where is it coming from? Where is it falling? How is it revealing light, texture, form, all of those things. And I know there's a lot of people who like to practice photography in abandoned buildings, and rightly so. It really becomes really interesting visually when you photograph those. But it does pose a real technical challenge with respect to all these things that we're talking about in terms of ISO and shutter speed and aperture. You need to maintain a relatively fast shutter speed in order to keep things sharp when light levels fall low. And regardless of whether more noise becomes present as a result of increasing the ISO, it helps ensure that you get a pretty tack sharp photograph. That being said, Stuart Chard here made this shot at f1.0 with his 50mm lens at about, it looks like 20th of a second or 20 seconds, maybe 20 seconds here. So I assume that he may have had the benefit of a tripod here. But his ISO here was just 200. So look at the quality of the light here. He shot this probably just after sunset. So you still have some blue in the sky, and you have the artificial light from the building on the outside on the face, and then you have this the light streaks from the cars that are driving by, and you have the artificial light sources off in the far distance. And this is what I'm talking about with respect to all the artificial light sources that can exist within a scene. When people are doing stuff at night, and especially long time exposures, a shutter speed, a tripod is absolutely necessary in order to be able to maintain a sharp photograph, slower than the 15th of a second. So when you have the benefit of a tripod, you can really play around like he did here. But most times, if you don't have the benefit of a tripod, that ISO has to go up in order to maintain a relatively steady camera so that you can get a tack sharp photograph. And that's the very reason why most people choose not to photograph at night, because they go, well, if I don't have a tripod, then it's just going to come up blurred, and so the camera stays in the bag or stays at home. And I think some of the shots here, we've really seen that without the benefit of a tripod and just by boosting the ISO, we can really discover a completely different world that exists out there at night. And though Stuart here makes a really lovely shot with the tripod, he gets that. He didn't put the camera away. He saw an interesting scene, and that slow shutter speed captures something that with a naked eye we would never see. And part of the unpredictable nature of photographing at night is probably one of the reasons why it's so attractive. Is unlike shooting in the middle of the day where you shoot at 500th of a second, you know exactly what you're going to get. But when you're shooting at night, you really don't know what you get until you actually take the photograph. And so even though it may be unpredictable, even though you may not be assured of what you're going to get when you snap the shutter, I think that's a good enough reason to take the photograph and play a little bit. And I think that we often get so fixated with trying to be perfect and making technically perfect photographs that we forget to play around a little bit and allow some little adventure in our photography, even if it means that the shot may be less than technically perfect. So thank you for joining me again. I'm hoping you're enjoying these videos. Please, if you want to be part of the Flickr group, just ask to be added, and I'll be glad to have you join us. And you can submit a small number of photographs each week, and I'll take a look at them when I'm considering making these videos. And if you're finding us through this YouTube channel and you've never heard of The Candid Frame, well, it's a podcast which features conversations with some of the world's best established and emerging photographers. And you can find us at thecandidframe.com and listen to those conversations. All right. Thanks for joining me again, and I will see you next time.